Hey, good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Phil Holloway, the attorney, joins us from the Holloway Law Group in Cobb County, Georgia. We'll talk to him about what's happening in Fulton County with Fani Willis. More breaking news today on that subject. Phil's got all the details ahead. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Tomorrow night, the State of the Union begins at 9 p.m., Joe Biden will be addressing a joint session of Congress with an update on how he views, again, the state of our country. What will he say? Because for most of us, things aren't good right now. Senator Ted Cruz is from the state of Texas, and he joins us now. Senator Cruz, good to have you back with us, sir. Thank you.
Vince, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, obviously, like any president, he's going to say the state of our union is strong. But do you agree, Senator?
Well, the Biden White House is previewing that the topic of his speech is going to be all the incredible accomplishments that Biden has had over the last 3 years. I have to admit I'm really excited about that because it means it's going to be the shortest State of the Union speech in the history of our country. And so, it'll be good to get out in 30 seconds and then get on with the rest of the night.
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing to hear what the White House, all the list of successes include the state of our economy and all the good things he's done for our border and on and on and on. And all of our allies are so pleased with us now, Senator. It's a long, great list.
I got to say, it is this White House and this administration is so out of touch. If you look at the policy record, it is a train wreck. It is a train wreck across the board, whether on the economy where inflation is hammering working families across the country. The cost of everything has gone up. People are struggling to make ends meet. That is the direct result of the irresponsible spending binge that Joe Biden and the Democrats went on. Or whether it is crime. We're seeing crime rates rising across the country as this administration undermines law enforcement and supports efforts that are releasing violent criminals into our communities. Or whether it is the chaos at our southern border, the worst illegal immigration in our nation's history, 10.4 million illegal immigrants since Joe Biden became president.
Yes.
And as bad as all of that is, the foreign policy and domestic policy is even worse. Biden inherited peace and prosperity. We now have two simultaneous wars, the biggest war in Europe since World War II and the worst war in the Middle East in 50 years. And that is all as a result of the mistakes made by this president, and yet they're going to try to spin it and say everything is hunky-dory and aren't we glad for what they've done.
Yeah, and quite honestly, you look at a lot of this and you go, it's not a mistake on some of the worst of this. I mean, Biden announced during the campaign that he would invite foreign nationals to surge America's borders, and they did that.
Yep.
He got rid of all of these policies designed to protect our borders immediately. The White House, Pete Buttigieg was on one of the shows this week, CNBC, insisting, no, he literally didn't do any of that. He literally did all of it, and we're suffering the consequences. Do you expect we'll hear the name Laken Riley, for instance, at the State of the Union?
I think the chances of that are 0.0%. They will not mention at all Laken Riley. They will not mention Jeremy Caceres. Last night you had Jen Psaki and Rachel Maddow laughing online and saying, why do people in Virginia care about illegal immigration? Well, maybe both of them should give an apology to the family of Jeremy Caceres, who was a 2-year-old boy murdered by an illegal alien in Virginia. In fact, less than 30 minutes away from Jen Psaki's $1.7 million home in Arlington, Virginia, and yet she's laughing. Why would anyone care about illegal immigration? The arrogance and the elite, out-of-touch view of this administration is really stunning, and I think it's why we're going to see in November the American people saying we want to change course pretty dramatically.
Is that an actual delusion that our leaders have? I mean, is that like the Jen Psaki view of the world? We're like, why do these people even care about immigration? Is that the kind of person who works in the White House right now? They genuinely don't understand this?
Look, as far as I can tell, that's the only kind of people that they hire. They hire people who are almost all very wealthy, and they're completely out of touch with working men and women. And understand, the Democrat Party made a decision about a decade ago, which is they chose between two traditional constituencies of the Democrat Party. They chose between jobs for union workers and dollars from California environmentalist billionaires, and they decided they cared about the money more than they cared about the jobs. And so they have been leaving working men and women out in the cold, which explains why Donald Trump was elected in 2016. I think it explains why he's going to be reelected in November of this year. But on top of that, you have John Kerry, who is fighting to drive up gas costs, to drive up utility costs, to restrict everyone's lifestyle dramatically,
Yes.
while at the same time he flies a private jet all over the globe and he has the carbon footprint of a small town. You have Jen Psaki and other elitists who have private security and armed guards surrounding them that don't understand why people are concerned about crime. And when it comes to illegal immigration, they just laugh at Laken Riley and her family. They just laugh and they say, well, it's not our fault that we keep releasing murderers who are killing innocent Americans. And I think it's why so many people are just fed up with where this administration is.
It is disgraceful. Yesterday, of course, was Super Tuesday, and Donald Trump is clearly the Republican nominee for president.
Absolutely.
You saw him, as you point out, over the course of the years, reshape the Republican electorate, adding a lot of, especially people, lower income, middle income people who are sick of Washington and would like to see a better way forward for their families. You've run for president before. You've done the math here. What does it look like this year in your view? I mean, how good of a hand is Donald Trump going into this election with?
Look, I think we're going to win in November. I think Trump is going to be reelected president. I think Republicans are going to win the Senate, and I think we're going to grow our majority in the House. And I think it's because the policy record of Biden is such a disaster. The classic question in any presidential election is, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And unless you happen to be a big tech billionaire or a Mexican drug lord, in which case, if you're one of those two, the answer is yes, and you ought to vote for Joe Biden. But if you're not a Mexican drug lord, the answer is hell no for just about everybody else. And I think we're going to see a big victory. Look, I'll give an example. So my guest tomorrow night, every senator is allowed to bring one guest. My guest is Sheriff Danny Dominguez. Danny Dominguez is a Democrat, an elected Democrat sheriff from Presidio County in South Texas, right along the Rio Grande border. He's been a Democrat in elected office for a long time, but he's coming tomorrow night and he's supporting me for re-election. He's endorsed me for re-election because the national Democrats have decided an open border is what they support, and they've decided they don't support law enforcement. And I think you're seeing lots of common sense Americans, including people who are Democrats, but they're just not crazy, who are recognizing that the national Democrats are no longer representing their interest or looking out for their own well-being.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I think Republican voters also are very concerned about Republican legislators and lawmakers. They want Republicans to do a better job of representing them. I know there's a big fight, for instance, as we speak at this moment, Senator, about a big spending package that made its way out of the House today, $460 billion that's designed to fund the federal government through the fall. The Senate is considering it now. Of course, the Senate controlled by Democrats. But your colleague, Mike Lee, was flagging all sorts of disasters in this thing today, talking about the funding for Georgetown University. Up until yesterday, or at least earlier today, there was even funding for some sort of BDSM kink club inside of this. It's like, how the hell did that happen? And when are we going to get people in office who can actually stop this crap from going on?
Well, the problem is that Congress has now enthusiastically embraced earmarks once again. And look, the Democrats are eager to engage in earmarks and carving out special pork to try to buy their reelections. And unfortunately, too many Republican politicians have decided they want to be in that business as well. One of the great conservative reforms that we managed to do now over a decade ago was to eliminate earmarks. And sadly, you saw Republican leadership in the Senate and the House undo that reform. I think that was a real mistake. And I think, there's an old phrase that earmarks are the gateway drug to out-of-control spending. And I got to say, we've gone through that gateway, and $34 trillion in national debt is now greatly hampering the future of our kids and grandkids.
Does making Trump the nominee again send a signal to Capitol Hill? Are senators and congressmen paying attention to this? I saw Mitch McConnell today, who is no real close friend of Donald Trump's. He even announced today he's endorsing him. What is the message that Washington receives when the Republican base says Trump's our guy?
Well, listen, when Trump was elected in 2016, that was frankly a giant screw you to career politicians in both parties. And the American people are rightly and understandably frustrated with career politicians who say one thing on the campaign trail and then do the opposite in office. And we've got now a new Republican leadership election in the Senate. I'm very glad for that. And my hope is that we will see a real conservative leader who actually will stand up and fight and will do what we said we would do, that will be responsive to the voters and that will honor the promises we make. And will members of Congress listen? I hope so. It's clear Donald Trump is going to be our nominee. I'm supporting him. I've endorsed him. And when he was president the first time, I was his single closest ally in the United States Senate. If and when he's reelected, I will once again be a single closest ally in the United States Senate. And I'll tell you, Vince, I'm proud of the policy record of what we were able to accomplish during his first term. And I believe we're going to accomplish even more during a second term by focusing on delivering real results for the men and women who elect us.
And what should the Republican leadership look like in the Senate to make that happen? Because Mitch McConnell, of course, has announced 8 months in advance that he'll be stepping down as the Republican leader. I saw your colleague in Texas, John Cornyn, has thrown his hat in the ring. Are you a part of Cornyn-mentum, or is there somebody else for you?
Look, I'm keeping my powder dry. There are a couple of folks who are running already. There may be more that get in. I think we're going to be debating and discussing that for many months. And I'm really interested in seeing a strong conservative leader who will listen to the conference, who will not behave as a dictator, and who will be committed to we're going to do what we say we would do. It's the biggest thing, the biggest piece of advice I give to any newly elected either senator or member of the House, which is just do what you said you would do. Whatever you told the voters in September or October, do that in January and February when you get here. And I'll tell you, Vince, it's one of the reasons I'm running for re-election this year, and I just launched today Democrats for Cruz, and I've got Democrats across the state who are supporting my campaign, and one of the most consistent things I hear from Democrats is they say, I'm a Democrat. I don't agree with everything you say, but I'll say this. You're doing what you said you would do. And I think we need Republican leadership that does what we said we would do.
Yeah, amen. In other words, no more amnesty disguised as border security. That's like an obvious one.
Amen.
Ted Cruz.
Absolutely.
The senator from Texas. Ted Cruz, thank you very much. Always nice to talk to you. Really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Vince. I appreciate it. Let me encourage you, go to tedcruz.org. Support our campaign. Chuck Schumer and George Soros are going to spend over $100 million against us. We need your help. Please go to tedcruz.org.
Yeah, and those guys have caused enough damage already. You're totally right. Thank you, sir. Good to talk to you. Yeah, as I mentioned to Senator Cruz a moment ago, the House, New York Times headline, House passes bipartisan $460 billion spending bill to avert a partial shutdown. Why? The House today passing that huge bill. They're funding half the federal government through the fall. It was a 339 to 85 vote. Those 85 votes, that's Republicans who were opposed to it. It capped months of heated negotiations. The Senate expected to take the bill up and pass it easily, sending it to President Biden in time for it to become law before a midnight deadline Friday. Here is Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, telling us a little bit about what's in the bill today.
The bill involves a total of $470 billion. Of that, $12.7 billion involves earmarks. Now, a lot of people are fond of saying in this circumstance, well, it's just a small percentage. It's a tiny percentage of American GDP, still a small percentage of what we spend overall, and still a pretty small percentage even of just domestic, discretionary, non-defense spending. Whatever. Look, the fact remains, it may not be the entire length of the train, or even measurable as half or
$12 billion in earmarks. Remember, the cost for the wall was $6 billion.
Quarter of or a third of the train, but it's what's driving the train. This is why we're $34 trillion and counting in debt, is because members, seeing that there is a bill that's too big, that's too expensive, that funds too many things, are more likely to vote for something if you adopt what they sometimes call sweeteners. These addictive corrupting substances within the bill that allow you to come home to your home constituencies or to this or to that special interest and say, I brought home the bacon.
All right, so what kind of sweeteners are in this thing? Well, Mike Lee points out nearly $1 million more to Georgetown University. Oh, goody, they need it. Nearly $1 million to left-wing groups for a coffee shop and a greenhouse, and $1 million for BDSM sex parties. Hold on. Until they got embarrassed by it. Yeah, that's right. The Hill report today, earmarked for Philly LGBTQ Center pulled over kink parties. This is what Congress is trying to fund while you're not looking. Confusion reigned Wednesday after an earmark for a Philadelphia LGBTQ center was pulled from the spending bill. Democrat Pennsylvania Senators John Fetterman and Bob Casey withdrew their support for $1 million for a renovation project for the William Way LGBT Community Center. It comes after a viral post by the far-right social media account, Libs of TikTok, criticized the center for allowing a group that holds monthly BDSM, that's people who beat each other, kink and fetish parties for adults to use their facilities. Just imagine, this is the stuff we catch. Just imagine what we don't catch. Coming up, Phil Holloway is following Fani Willis and her fiasco down in Fulton County, Georgia. He's got the latest for us right after the news. Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I can't get enough of the Fani Willis saga. I really can't. I was watching today the state Senate down there in Georgia investigating all of the wrongdoing and corruption of the Fulton County District Attorney. And how is this going to end? Well, nobody's been following this thing closer than my next guest. Phil Holloway is the founder of the Holloway Law Group in Cobb County, Georgia, and the host of the hit true crime podcast, Sworn. And he joins us now. Phil, so grateful for your time today. Thank you, sir.
Oh, always happy to help out. Glad to be with you guys today.
What is going on in Georgia? The latest, it seems, is that that there's a whole bunch of people coming forward to say that that Nathan Wade, Terrence Bradley, and Fani Willis all lied to the court.
Yeah, and you know what? The steady drip of bad news and bad facts for Fani Willis just seems to never end. The most significant of the recent people to come forward is, in my opinion, the chief assistant district attorney in Cobb County, Georgia, which is next door to Fulton. She's come out and said that, no, look, she heard Fani Willis make a phone call in September to Terrence Bradley, who's the former attorney and law partner of Nathan Wade, and say, look, Terrence, they're coming for us. You know, you need to keep your mouth shut, or words, you know, to that effect. I'm summarizing, of course. And if that's the case, then that's evidence that she's been involved in witness tampering and basically, you know, impeding the integrity of the judicial process. And
yes,
that's a big problem, because that's a crime. Of course, perjury is also a crime, as is violation of her oath of office.
Right.
If there's a political will or some kind of law enforcement will, basically to investigate this, so this could get very bad for her. She's in very, very dangerous territory. But quite frankly, I'm not sure that she's even really actively aware of the danger that she's potentially in here.
Yeah, and it doesn't. So if this was in September of last year, maybe for a little bit, the pressure didn't get to Terrence Bradley, because it seemed like he was sharing a lot of information over text message with Miss Merchant, the attorney who is representing one of the co-defendants standing alongside Donald Trump here. And she was getting all sorts of details from Terrence Bradley about the nature and length of the relationship between Nathan Wade and Fani Willis. So what changed? Why did Terrence Bradley start clamming up?
Well, she testified today before the Georgia Senate, as you mentioned, and that issue was addressed. It was essentially presented in her testimony that, you know, earlier this year, around the time that, you know, she had filed this motion to disqualify, some people closely associated with the district attorney, D.A. Willis, who also knew Mr. Bradley, sort of, you know, reached out to him in ways that he might have interpreted as some kind of implicit or implied, or maybe express, I don't know, I wasn't privy to it, some kind of a threat. And it makes sense logically, because if you look at the text messages, and frankly, if you look at the things that the other witnesses are saying that he has said to them. He was 100% on board with Ms. Merchant filing this motion, making sure that it was accurate, getting her ducks in a row, even pointing her towards other witnesses that could verify what he's saying. But then abruptly, he testifies and he says, I don't remember, or I was speculating. Now, the judge is going to have to decide whether to accept that testimony or to accept these what we call prior inconsistent statements, which the text messages and potential testimonies from other witnesses would be a prior inconsistent statement.
Yes.
The judge can use those text messages as substantive evidence if he chooses to do so to determine that Willis, in fact, lied. And if that's the case, now we're in disbarment territory and perhaps even criminal prosecution if there's somebody willing to take up the criminal prosecution case, because it certainly would not be the DA's office in Fulton County.
And everybody agrees those are actually his text messages. Terrence Bradley doesn't dispute those, does he?
That's right. No, absolutely, they're correct. They're not disputed. He admitted it in court. And now, of course, the judge has said, in addition to the actual ones that you discussed in your testimony, he directed Ms. Merchant to file all of them with the court because the prosecutor had who was handling the case that day objected and said, look, we need to see the whole thing for context. Well, the whole thing for context doesn't help Ms. Willis at all. In fact, it shows that Bradley was actively participating and basically, helping her get her ducks in a row so she could file this motion. He was a willing participant, in collaborating, if you will, with a fellow attorney.
If it were up to you, Phil Holloway, how would you judge this case? Would you rule to disqualify Fani Willis today? Do you think this is open and shut?
Yeah, no question. She's disqualifiable in my view on multiple grounds. We're well outside now. We're beyond the original issue, which was whether or not she had a inappropriate affair with her independent contractor boyfriend who she steered money to and was reaping the financial benefits directly because he was flying her all over the world for luxury romantic travel. We're beyond that. We are now in the territory where if she's found to have perpetrated a fraud on the court, not only in how she brings this case, but how she's continuing to defend her conduct, then that I think is a separate ground and something that the judge could rule on independently of anything else. So absolutely, I think the legal issue in my mind is very clear, but we have a political consideration now. It's been breaking this afternoon here on the ground in Atlanta that someone affiliated with Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition is going to challenge Judge McAfee in the nonpartisan judicial primary that's coming up here in a couple of months in Georgia. So it looks like maybe Willis has taken her political operation or political machine in Fulton County and perhaps weaponized it against the judge. But we'll see how that turns out because you could never seemingly separate politics from judicial issues or legal issues in some states like Georgia.
So for the Washington metropolitan audience you're speaking to right now, just to be clear, what you're talking about is Judge McAfee, the position he occupies is an elected position, a nonpartisan elected position.
That's correct. It's not. Now, he's appointed by the Republican governor, and there's, by all accounts, he's got, conservative leanings, but Willis is a Democrat. She has to run in the partisan primary and then in the general election in November, which, of course, is going to have Donald Trump on the ballot, one of the people she's prosecuting. McAfee, on the other hand, judges are nonpartisan, so whether someone is actually a Republican or actually a Democrat, they all get thrown in together in the nonpartisan primary, and whether that's good or bad is a discussion for a different day. I personally don't like it, but in any event, here we are, and now we have an obvious person with left-leaning ties running against someone who's probably a Republican appointed by the Republican governor. And, it's going to be anybody's guess to see how it plays out. Fulton County, Georgia, North Fulton, about half of it tends to lean very red, and South Fulton, where Willis has a lot of her support, tends to be very blue. And so it's going to be very interesting. Joe Biden won Fulton County by at least officially by a handy margin 4 years ago. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out.
Right, because if Judge McAfee becomes the one who basically delivers a victory to Donald Trump by way of this disqualification hearing, you're pointing out that could increase tremendously the electoral pressure to throw him out of office there.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a fair point. Fani Willis has a lot of support amongst some of the certain areas, the deep blue areas of Fulton County, and those are very highly populated areas. So she is going to be a political force to be reckoned with, if nothing else. And you hope that judges don't factor that in, but sometimes they do. But regardless of how he rules, the case is going to be appealed by whichever side loses. So he's got to think about that. And, we're not going to have an answer on this before the election. So it's going to be very interesting politically to watch how this plays out here on the ground in Atlanta.
But the judge is expected to rule on whether or not to disqualify Fani Willis within the next 2 weeks, I've been told. And now it should be within the next week.
Yeah, we're down to about a week. But he's not bound to that. There's nothing that says he's got to rule, when he as anticipated. He could take his time, or he could go another route in light of this new information. I think probably the safest thing for him to do, to be honest, is to reopen the evidence and allow some of these additional witnesses to come to court. Because if you've got a fellow prosecutor saying, look, Judge, I was a witness to Fani Willis,
yes,
putting pressure and intimidating a witness in the case, that's a big problem. And that's the kind of thing that the judge could use to insulate himself from a lot of criticism if he decides to go that route. That might be how I would do it, to be honest.
Phil Holloway, one of the things that's been bothering me about this whole thing is obviously we're talking about whether or not she will be disqualified from this case. But the other piece is, like, if you're an attorney, you're in Georgia. If you're an attorney and you go to court under sworn testimony, you brazenly lie to the court about your activities and your corruption and your conflicts of interest. Shouldn't the consequences be more than just, you're thrown off the current case? Shouldn't you be disbarred for that?
Yeah, it's disbarment territory. You have a duty of candor to the court at all times. So even if you're not under oath, you can't lie to the judge, and if you do, you can lose your license. That's squarely where we are. But it's worse than that, because she can be prosecuted for perjury. She can be prosecuted for the felony offense of violating her oath of office, and also if she's influencing a witness using corrupt means or motives, that's also another felony offense. So there's lots of, and if you're convicted of a felony, you could lose your license to practice law for that. So there's a lot of ways that this could play out. Where it goes, we don't know. We're in uncharted territory here. This case is like nothing else we've ever seen or experienced before, and never will again in our lifetime.
One more for you, Phil Holloway, and I'm grateful for your time today. What is Fulton County's reputation in terms of this type of political hijinks? I mean, is this considered a very corrupt area? I know when Fani Willis came into office in the first place, she was running that she was going to be the fresh face who's not going to be corrupt, who's not going to be sleeping with her subordinates. And guess what we're dealing with now?
Yeah, well, the last guy who she beat, I had to be in full disclosure, I had a Willis yard sign up. I live in Fulton County, because those of us in the legal community, we really wanted to get rid of the last guy, and nobody would have expected this from her at the time. And so we really wanted to get rid of that guy. He was prosecuting police officers because they were defending themselves in the streets of Atlanta in the riots of 2020. And so he was prosecuting police officers, in my opinion, to garner political support and to get votes. It was really, frankly, very disgusting. And that actually motivated a lot of people in the northern part of Fulton County to go vote in the Democrat primary, because that's where Willis was campaigning against her predecessor. And they switched over to vote back, in the general election. They voted, Republican, of course, a lot of them did, but Georgia allows people to do that. So she got a lot of Republican support to vote for her in the primary to get rid of her predecessor because of the perception of corruption.
Yes, and it does seem like all of the lawyers down there know each other, because I'm watching this and it seems like they're all saying nice things about each other. Oh, I supported your campaign. I wore your T-shirt. The only people in the room, the only lawyers in the room who aren't playing that game are like the national lawyers that Donald Trump's team brought in. They're just like not interested in any of the local politics between these guys. Am I reading that courtroom the right way?
Yeah, you are. I mean, look, it's true, especially in the criminal bar. And then I don't mean criminal defense bar. I mean criminal bar, and I include prosecutors and defense attorneys, because we all know each other more or less. And there are some really, really good lawyers from within the state and without who are bringing their talent to bear on this case. But you're right. I know many of the people involved in this saga and very well, and I have for a couple of decades now, 25 or so years. And so we tend. This is why I'm saying we are all very, very shocked that
Yes.
This is kind of embarrassing, to be honest with you, that this is happening right here in the metro area. It doesn't make our legal community look all that great. To have
It's got to be tearing relationships
out
apart.
there lying in court.
Is it tearing relationships apart? Are people ending friendships over this?
It certainly doesn't help because I would imagine that the tensions or the relationship might be strained between
Yes.
Ms. Merchant and some folks. And I think she talked about that some today. But it's definitely not helpful because this is the type of stuff that you either come down on one side or the other, and it can destroy a lot of relationships, not unlike the electoral politics that we've all been living through for the last several years.
All right. Well, the Fani Willis fiasco continues. Phil Holloway, thank you, sir, for giving us all those details. Really appreciate your time today, sir.
Yep. Happy to be here anytime.
Good to talk to you. You ever miss the good old days of the 2016 Republican primary? I know Donald Trump has this thing stitched up now, but sometimes I go back. You just get nostalgic and remember him fighting with everybody. I was watching one of those videos. Remember that debate where he was standing on stage and he attacks Jeb Bush, and the crowd starts booing. They're like, boo, boo. And Trump goes, you hear all those boos? They're all Republican donors. And then he looks at the camera and goes, the RNC only gave out tickets to the big donors. Those are the only people in this room. They don't even represent the American people. And they're like, boo. The boos just keep getting louder. He's like, I don't even care. They're just donors. And you know why they don't like me? Because I don't need their money, he said. And it was just, and a star was born. And a star was born. That was an unbelievable campaign. And I'm never going to live that down because I got to travel for those early states, and I went to the actual debates, and I got to see this all in person, and it was just the greatest political tourism. I will never match it ever again for the rest of my life. And I was just telling Corey a moment ago, I was laughing. I'm looking at Nikki Haley jumped out of the race, and he called her, his nickname for Nikki Haley during this was Bird Brain. Is that it? Bird Brain? That's fine. Not his best. Bird Brain. It's amusing. I was thinking Little Nicky would have been good. Remember the old Adam Sandler movie where he's like a little devil or something? They call him Little Nicky. He could have called her that. But Corey reminded me, well, Little was for Marco, right? Little Marco Rubio. And that brought me back to New Hampshire, the New Hampshire debate in 2016. I'm there with a group of my Daily Caller colleagues, Tucker Carlson. We're all together. We're watching this debate. And right after the debate, we all jump into a car, and we had rented a Suburban. There's thick snow on the ground, and we drive off to the one steakhouse in town, and there's like almost nobody there. There's like 3 tables at the steakhouse. We sit down to have a dinner. And the Secret Service comes in not long after us and starts scanning the restaurant. We're like, hey, who's coming? Who's got the Secret Service protection? Sure enough, it's Donald Trump and his entire family come walking in. And they stop by the table. Trump's like, hey, how'd we do? How'd we do? How do you think we did? And we're like, hey, pretty good. And he's like, did you see Marco? He was sweating. He was just dripping. He was dripping with sweat, little Marco, he says, at the table. He never stops, this guy. It's like even on a small table, he's doing a performance for us. He heads off. He gets his steak. I found out later he ordered it well done, which was horrifying. I was like, wow, if there's anything I don't like about him, it's the well done order on his steak. But that was hilarious. I remember one of the Secret Service agents leaning over to Tucker Carlson as he was walking by and said, sir, just want you to know, love the Daily Caller. Read it every day. I was like, things are good. Things are good. And they were good. Hey, the great one, Mark Levin, is up next. Tomorrow on the program, Jason Miyares is joining the show. He literally just endorsed Donald Trump. We'll talk to him about that very thing.